Welcome to the Cardinal News of Virginia, a podcast from Cardinal News. We are paywall free at cardinalnews.org. The Cardinal podcast is sponsored by 5 Points Creative, a full-service award-winning marketing firm serving clients all over the U.S. from their headquarters in Roanoke, Virginia. I'm Dutchie Jessee, and if you go to cardinalnews.org and click on data centers under the projects tab, you will see story after story. You can just keep scrolling, keep scrolling. There's been so much written about data centers from Cardinal News, especially over the last 12 months. Data centers are massive warehouse-like buildings that house computers and networking equipment to store and send data. Northern Virginia is home to 35% of all the world's data centers. It has more than any other location in the world, but they are running out of space. We talked about this before on the podcast with Grace Mamon. Today, we're going to talk a little bit more about some other coverage we've had and some updates on it. We've been covering it quite a bit. Two of the reporters who have been covering it are Grace Mamon, who covers Danville for us, and Tad Dickens, our technology reporter. Welcome to you both.
Hi, Dutchie.
Thanks for being here today. Grace, I'm going to start with you about a very specific proposed project that has gotten a lot of attention in Pittsylvania County. And again, you and I have talked a little bit about this on a previous episode, but we want to catch everyone up with what's gone on yet. Let's talk about the proposal from Balico. What is Balico? What was their proposal?
Yeah, so Balico is an energy and infrastructure development company. It's based in Herndon, and the company has not yet built a data center, but they want to. They wanted to build their first one in Pittsylvania County, and so they had a rezoning application in with the county to rezone about 740 to 750 acres of land that is currently designated for agricultural use into an industrial use. And they had planned to build about 12 data center buildings on this land, as well as on-site power generation. And it was going to be located near the town of Chatham and the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which would have fueled the on-site power for this project, which is why this specific parcel was so attractive to the company.
Yes. So what happened? I mean, we were talking about it for months and months, and it looks like it's not going to happen. Bring us up to date.
Right. Yeah, there was a lot of developments recently. So the final vote on this item had been postponed twice already, first in February and then again in March. And so it was finally going to be, there's going to be a decision finally at the April meeting, which was April 15th. One day before that, Balico announced a request to withdraw their proposal, which would have meant that they could go back to the drawing board and resubmit a different proposal or a tweaked proposal at any time. And so that could have been a data center development, or it could have been another type of development. Like there were some mentions of a residential subdivision. So Balico would have been able to kind of take a step back and regroup and resubmit. But because the meeting had already been advertised to the public, they had gone to the trouble of moving venues because of an anticipated large crowd. The board decided to keep it on the agenda and take a vote on that withdrawal request, whether or not to approve it. And so at the meeting, they did vote to deny that withdrawal request, which meant that the vote and the public hearing would proceed. There's about 2.5 hours of the public hearing where residents expressed their thoughts on this. Most of them were in opposition to the project, although a few people did speak in favor of it. And after the end of a long night, the board finally did take their final vote on this and voted to deny the rezoning application. So Balico now is not able to come back and resubmit a data center plan for a full year.
There's a great photo associated with the coverage of that meeting in April, where you see a lot of bright yellow t-shirts. This was an organized effort, the community members and neighbors who were opposed to this. You hear about this frequently in stories about development and potential development, and that is the old NIMBY acronym, not in my backyard. And I know you talked to some people who said, this is more than that. This goes beyond NIMBY. So how so, according to them? What specific things were they opposed to, afraid of?
Right. So concerns from residents kind of ran the gamut. There were a whole host of concerns, primarily about losing or jeopardizing a rural lifestyle, the cultural identity that exists in Pittsylvania County. It's always been an agricultural area of the state. Lately, there is a lot of manufacturing activity, but it's never been a place where there's a tech industry. And so people were kind of resistant to having a technology-based industrial complex come into the middle of agricultural farmland. They live in Pittsylvania County because they want to live in a rural area away from these kinds of developments. So a lot of the concern was around that sort of the data center not fitting in with the existing culture in Pittsylvania County. Of course, there were also aesthetic concerns, big concrete buildings next to rolling hills and people's farmlands and cattle and that sort of thing. There were also environmental concerns. There were traffic concerns, water usage, energy usage, which I'm sure Tad will talk a little bit more about, but a whole host of concerns, and also a general distrust in the company, which didn't have a track record of building data centers. They hadn't done this before, and a lot of people were very skeptical of whether Balico would deliver on these promises that it had made, especially the economic promises of tax revenue and job creation.
Yeah, because that's basically a big argument that people have in favor of these is
Right.
what they're calling transformative tax revenue. Since you gave me an opening, I'm going to head on over to Tad now,
Yeah.
and we're going to talk about some of the work he's done covering this. A headline for a story that you wrote recently, Tad, was this: energy demand will outstrip supply in Virginia as data centers proliferate. That's a pretty big statement. What did you get into in terms of researching what energy is required for these and what Virginia is looking at?
The main source that I took from was a report by a Virginia General Assembly group that studies things for the Commonwealth, and they said that you're looking at in the next 10 years double energy consumption, and within 40 years, now that's pretty long term, or by 2040, I should say, an increase of demand by up to 183%. So those are some pretty big numbers there, and that study and others that were done pretty much put the blame mostly on data centers. There is some talk of electric vehicles consuming more power, more folks using heat pumps in their homes. That takes more electricity, but the main culprit is data centers. The study done for the General Assembly said that even without data centers, that within the coming years you'd see a 15% increase in demand, but that's nothing like 183%. So they're really focusing on the problem with data centers. PJM, which is the regional energy grid that includes Virginia and its two main suppliers or utilities, Appalachian Power and Dominion Energy, says that it's possible that they'll be looking at some real supply and demand issues even within the next year. A gentleman named Gary Wood, who is president and CEO of Central Virginia Electric Cooperative, weighed in on this for me. He was part of, or is part of the plan to bring energy to a data center that's coming to Appomattox in the next few years. He'll be getting his energy, which comes to the co-ops through the major utilities. Dominion will be supplying that energy. The co-op pretty much does the infrastructure and takes care of the financial aspects of it, the billing and whatnot. But he said we're looking at rolling blackouts within the next 3 to 5 years. Rotating blackouts, rotating outages. There are a lot of names for them, but it would be a controlled situation where in extreme weather events in the winter and in the summertime, that the utility has to draw back power to certain regions for up to about a half an hour, and then rotate that out into another region and thereby save the grid, prevent an uncontrollable blackout. And this is something that they're looking at as a strong possibility within the next few years.
Grace, I'm wondering if the people that you have seen either individually doing reporting with one-on-one out in the field, so to speak, in people's neighborhoods and but also at these public meetings, does there seem to be an awareness by the potentially affected communities about the energy demand? Was that one of their things that they cited? They seem to understand that, hey, this is a big deal for everyone, not just you living near it.
Yeah, that's a really good question because it kind of leads to the idea that data centers, the industry as a whole, it was relatively unfamiliar down here until pretty recently. Folks in Northern Virginia are much more well versed in the data center industry because they live near it. There's one data center in Southside currently, it's in Mecklenburg. And other than that, they don't really exist in our region. And Pittsylvania hadn't even seen any proposals for data centers until last year. So the energy demands is something, along with all kinds of other things about the industry that people are learning about now. And I think Tad's reporting has done a great job of really putting that information before a statewide audience, because unless you live in Northern Virginia, you may not know about this sort of thing. So as people have learned more, both residents and then also elected officials in Pittsylvania County, energy is a big concern. This specific project would have been fueled by the Mountain Valley Pipeline. So I think there was more concern around water usage and other infrastructure, but it's definitely something that is increasingly on people's radar.
Tad, there's no requirement to build new energy plants, but state law requires utilities to provide power, right, to customers. So how could that factor into the supply and demand problem?
Well, I'd like to say first to step back to what Grace was talking about.
Yeah.
Water is definitely a concern, and we'll be writing about that in the near future. So, podcast listeners and readers, hang around for that. Look out for that. I would say that one of the problems with imbalance is that while there is not a regulation or law that says you have to build, you do have to deliver power according to the state to those who ask. That doesn't mean that utilities are not interested in building new sources of power. While they're not necessarily building full new plants, Dominion is looking to provide up to 16,100 megawatts in the state through solar by 2035, and also is developing wind turbines off the Virginia and North Carolina coasts. It recently picked up the lease for a area off the North Carolina coast that they're going to add to. So, and they're adding battery storage for wind and solar because, as we all know, wind and solar aren't always generating. So you want to be able to store that and call on it when it's necessary. Gas is another option there because that seems to always be available. Maybe weather dependent at times, but the point is that the companies are looking now to build, and Dominion and Appalachian both have talked about the possibility of small modular reactors, which is, that's about half of the power that you could get from a conventional nuclear power plant, but it's still 300 megawatts. That said, the Appomattox facility that is in the pipeline, so to speak, will have a peak load projected of 300 megawatts. So you're looking at like a lot of power at every new facility. Grace might correct me here if I'm missing a piece of info, but the average data center comes in with a power peak need of between 20 and 50 megawatts. And so every new one that's built is going to add that much to the grid. Still, we're looking at most of the proposed data centers in being in Northern Virginia, and so they're the ones that are feeling the pinch. And Grace has done a great job of talking about how both residents and legislators have responded to what's going on up there, and what advice they have for the folks in Southside who appear to, well, it's open to question if any more of these are coming to Pittsylvania County, but there are other Southwest Virginia locations that want them. Pulaski County is very likely to get one. Wythe County has been trying to get one for a long time, and so we're looking at something that's coming, and we're looking at more energy that needs to be produced for them, because given, from corporate needs to store data to everything that's in our cell phone that's being held in data centers, the need doesn't appear to be going away. So it's got to work out somehow. And in recent times, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has approved some new projects, fast-tracked for projects that could come online in the next few years to decades. Now, is it a race against the clock? I really don't know, but we're going to find out soon. Whether the production of energy facilities is going to match the demand that continues to come.
And Cardinal News, just for everyone's benefit, if you're new to us, on our projects page, again, there is a lot of information on small nuclear reactors as well, because that's been in the news in the last couple of years as well. Tad alluded to this. Grace and I have spoken about this in a previous episode, where you did go up to Northern Virginia and talk to some people directly impacted by data centers there. One of the things I thought was so interesting in your Pittsylvania County Balico story, you talked to a couple that had left Northern Virginia for this more rural lifestyle. And then along comes a data center proposal. And the guy, I think he even said, I feel like I brought this with me. But in terms of neighbors, communities, there was a lot of strife generated by this proposal. There was a lot of unifying of opponents, right? But frequently, we have heard quotes at these meetings saying, this pitted neighbor against neighbor, families against families. One of the board members, Kevin Bowman, referenced the strife and everything that's happened. I know other localities have been watching, because, as Tad mentioned, these are coming, or going to try to come to more and more localities in our part of the state, Southwest and Southside. Why was there so much rancor, Grace, when they say it pitted neighbors against neighbors? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, these kind of things are always so interesting to me, because it can be so divisive, but it also does bring communities together in other ways, like you said. So that couple you mentioned who had relocated from Fairfax County, you're right. He said, I feel like this, data center developments are like gum on my shoe. I moved away from them and here they are again. And he met a lot of his neighbors through this process. They moved in 2021, so they'd already been a little bit established in the community, but he said he met so many people through this process that he's become close with now, because they're all kind of fighting, they have a common goal. And there was a lot of unity, like you mentioned. But on the other hand, neighbors were frustrated with one another, because Balico did have selling agreements with a lot of landowners in Pittsylvania County. This was a large parcel that was cobbled together from agricultural land. And so people, folks who lived near that were upset and hurt that their neighbors would sell. They saw it as selling out to a big company. And then, another issue was that there was one town in Pittsylvania County that did stand to benefit from this financially. The town of Hurt had entered into a water sale agreement with Balico. Balico needed a lot of water for the data center project. And they were going to get that water from Hurt. They were going to build a water membrane treatment plant and a pipeline to run the water from the town 20 miles south to where the campus would have been. And Hurt was hoping that with Balico as a customer, they would be able to lower water prices for their residents. And water prices in Hurt have been historically pretty high. And so a lot of the folks from that community really wanted to see this go through.
Mm-hmm. What happens next from either one of you? I mean, we'll all be watching, right? These things will come, they'll be proposed, there'll be rezoning required, and it'll have to go through a process. What are you looking for in particular, Tad? I'll start with you, about anything recent coming up. And again, I'll promote that we've got more coverage coming, especially when it comes to water, because there's a lot of cooling that has to take place. in a data center, and that's where some of the water usage comes in. What are you looking for specifically, Tad, in terms of things that maybe we should also be looking for?
Well, speaking to the water issue, the Virginia report doesn't, classify that as a crucial problem in the near future. It really addressed energy more, but it did make a lot of suggestions that we detailed in a recent report, and those suggestions, a few of them were taken up in the General Assembly this past year. By the time that items made it to Youngkin's desk, they had been rewritten. And for instance, Danica Rome, who's a senator from Prince William County, who's been ever since her time as a legislator up there, which includes time as a delegate, has been dealing with issues related to data centers because there are a lot of them up there and a lot more proposed. And one of the bills that she wrote this year was one that was called a demand response bill.
Mhm.
And the way it started was that it would have allowed large energy customers, but that's not a Freudian slip, by the way, large energy customers to it would have forced them to create a demand response program, and if you use more than 25 megawatts of power, that you were subject to having your consumption decreased at times of high demand, such as difficult weather situations, and that they would have been forced to do that by law, and it would have it reduced their consumption, but it would have mitigated power deficits. Customers who aren't data centers would not have been affected. It was rewritten very early on in the sort of legislative process, and by the time it got to Youngkin's desk, it would simply direct the Department of Energy in the state to evaluate a possible demand response program and make recommendations. So it was, in a sense, just sort of kicking the can a little bit. And then Youngkin vetoed it. He wrote in his explanation about the veto that the State Corporation Commission already can evaluate such a program's effectiveness, and that utilities already have demand response programs for large customers who can opt in to participate if their industry has potential operational flexibility. Now, that's a lot of words there, but the JLARC, the state report that was done about data centers, said that they don't have that kind of a demand response program, and that data centers are not bound to anything like that, and that the recommendation was that the General Assembly might amend the Virginia Code to require the demand response program. So that's something, and I don't know, that might have sounded more complicated than it actually is, but that's something that I think they will try to address more in the future, because demand response is at the heart, in my opinion, maybe I shouldn't say my opinion, but just having done all this reporting, that's at the heart of what we're looking at. If you demand a lot of energy and there's no energy to be supplied, then we're looking at those rolling blackouts that Gary
Mhm.
Wood was talking about. So that's a
No,
big issue that needs to be addressed, I think.
actually, when you said demand response, I thought I'm going to remember that because I bet you I'm going to start reading about that more. And this conversation has kind of set me up to understand it better. So that's where we'll end it. And I was going to say this anyway, Tad, but you bring it up. I appreciate both of you, Grace and Tad, and all of our reporters who, you get to go out and learn things. It's a very interesting job from that point of view, but breaking it down sometimes to make it understandable, because these things can get very complicated. I appreciate that, and we'll keep looking for it because this isn't going away anytime soon, and there's a lot of different ramifications and elements involved to it. So I want to thank you both for your work so far and your ongoing coverage of this. Tad, if people want to get a hold of you, how do they email you? What's your email?
We have the easiest email addresses in the world. It's just my first name, TAD, at cardinalnews.org. And I've always thought, I wonder what will happen if another Grace comes to the Cardinal, or another Susan. I don't think there'll be another Tad coming along, but there could be another Matt, could be another Dwayne. So
Yeah. No more Dutchies, I don't think.
Or
Grace,
yeah.
Grace,
One
how
Dutchie.
do people find you?
Same thing. It's just Grace, GRACE at cardinalnews.org. That's the best way
Thank
to
you
reach me.
guys both so much. And we will talk to you all again very soon. I want to thank everyone for listening to the Cardinal News of Virginia. This podcast is sponsored by 5 Points Creative. Thanks also to Zach Shelton for his technical support. You can find all of our journalism paywall free at cardinalnews.org. I'm Dutchie Jessee.